participating in the Datathon. And hopefully you guys are enjoying it and have at least learned something new. In this particular session, we'll be covering a slightly different kind of topic than the other sessions. As most of you are aware, instead of the technical side of things, our speakers are here today to talk about careers in the field of data science, as well as their experiences navigating the world of data. Topics of this session's presentation will include things like co-op experiences in data science, do's and don'ts, the day-to-day life of a data science co-op, and other tips and tricks that these very experienced individuals can provide. We also should have some time at the end of the presentation for some questions if anyone has any. And this presentation will also be recorded and put onto our YouTube channel in case any of you guys want to refer to it again later. And just a reminder to everyone to be respectful and keep your microphones muted for the duration of the presentation. So without any further ado, let's get to our speakers. Speaking today will be four very experienced individuals in data science. We have Irina, Mujtaba, Simona, and Cesar. And I think it would be best if I allow them to introduce themselves. So with that being said, I think you guys can share your screen if you guys want to with the presentation that you guys have prepared.
Yeah, sure. I can start sharing my screen.
Awesome.
Okay, hold on. All right, can you guys see the presentation?
Yep, looks good.
Awesome. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Irina. Sorry, I'm just fighting a little cold here, so I sound a little nasally. But welcome to the career development session. So first, we'll kind of go through like the presentation content. So myself and the three other speakers here will introduce ourselves a little bit, what we're studying, where we worked in our previous co-ops, and then kind of like the journey of like how we got to all of like the different co-ops and how we got into the field of data. And then we'll kind of go through some resume tips for you guys, job search tips and interview tips. And this presentation will be relatively short, maybe like 10-15 minutes. So we'll have lots of time at the end for a Q&A session, and you guys can just ask us anything. So we'll get started. Mujtaba, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Mujtaba. Most people call me Muj. I'm a 4A geomatics student here at Waterloo. And I'm predominantly in data engineering now, not data science. I'm currently working part-time at Ecobee. I worked at Manulife before. So yeah, hi. If we go to the next slide. So a little bit of how I kind of got around into data engineering. So obviously I'm in geomatics. We're very GIS focused. For those of you that don't know, GIS is a software predominantly used for mapping purposes and geospatial data analytics. So it was somewhat related. However, that's one area of overlap and you both kind of go their separate ways. But that's kind of what kind of started, I kind of started seeing some interest in data. And obviously we have to take some CS courses. So I started learning how to code. I wasn't particularly great at the beginning. You know, you live and you learn, but yeah, I didn't do great in first year CS courses, in first year school in general, but I ended up getting a co-op as a data analyst. And there I kind of got a little bit of an intro to ML, you know, working with, this was specifically object recognition and you know, stuff like that. So, and computer vision related. So, but that kind of opened my eyes to ML. So I got into a bit of data science, started exploring. And then I realized that's cool, but I kind of like data engineering more, where we work on a little more of the practical side of things, rather than getting into the math of ML. Not great at it, so I decided to transition a bit to data engineering. And I've kind of just been working on gaining some experience and finding a niche to fit in to diversify myself with a bit.
Great. Okay, yeah. So as I said before, I'm Irina. I study chemical engineering here at the University of Waterloo, which is like completely like unrelated to data. And I'm an ex-data scientist at Clearbank and Applyboard, two very nice startups. Yeah, so my journey is a little bit different. As I said, I'm in chemical engineering, so it has no relation whatsoever to data science and tech. So I started my journey here at Waterloo. I did my first 3 co-ops in chemical engineering related fields. So they were like lab technicians, manufacturing, etc. I liked it, but I didn't love it. And I always kind of like at the back of my head, I was like, oh, like I really wanted to kind of work in tech. Like there's like so many cool like innovation like things, opportunities here. So I started attending some hackathons, and that's where I really gained my interest in tech. Specifically, I did like a couple of tech projects with my friends and stuff. And then I kind of like dived into like the data science. I was like, okay, like I like math, and I'm like really interested in this. I didn't really like the, like I didn't want to go heavy like programming and stuff and like a software engineer. So I was like, oh, data science is pretty cool. Let's try that out. So then I started my first data science job search, which was I think 2 years ago, and I experienced a lot of rejections. I went into like the continuous round, but I somehow surprisingly landed a job at Applyboard, which is where I basically learned like SQL skills, Tableau, Python, all of that stuff on the job at Applyboard. It's honestly like from my personal experience, it's so much easier like learning these skills and all this is with like practice like on the job, whereas like like learning by yourself through like online courses and stuff. And then so yeah, like I worked there, I had a great time there. The team gave me a lot of mentorship and stuff. And then for my next job search, I worked at Clearco. That was like just this year, the past 8 months. And this is where like I improved my technical skills, and I gained some exposure to machine learning and all that stuff. So yeah, that's my journey. Simona?
Yeah, I still see, oh, I think it's transitioning. Okay, there we go. So hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Simona. I'm in 4A biomedical engineering. I kind of come from 2 different paths. I've done a decent amount of data engineering at Swift Medical and Ritual, and most recently I actually worked with Irina as data science co-op at Clearco. So Irina, next slide. Yeah, so a bit about my journey. So I came into my program with 0 software experience from high school. I was extremely intimidated by coding. First year CS course was brutal. It was the worst thing in the world. I thought I was going to fail. It was terrible. And I swore I'd never do that for a co-op. Like, I don't know why anyone would want to opt to do coding for a job. So that was where I started. And then as I went through, the co-op process, I realized there's a lot of software jobs, and also I was interested in the companies that were in tech. I wanted to get experience like in the software world. So I got my foot in the door at Ritual, which is a mobile food ordering app company in Toronto, and I started doing test engineering. So it was really basic. It was a lot of manual QA, but it was the first time I was working on any kind of tech team, and I learned, really basic skills like what is GitHub, how to use GitHub, how to use Python. So that was really, I think it was good, in retrospect, to get exposure to what it's like working on a tech team. I actually went back to Ritual for a second co-op term, and I had signed on to do backend engineering, which was all in Java, and I hated that. And my manager was kind enough to let me switch teams actually midway through and join the data science team. They were working on a really cool revenue forecasting project that I was interested in, and so I did some time series modeling, and that's how I got exposure to data science to begin with. And after that, I realized, okay, like I like working in the data field. And for my next co-op, I worked at a company called Swift Medical in Toronto, which does wound visioning and imaging. And they were a great place to work. I got a lot of exposure both on the data engineering, data science side. So data engineering is more building the tools and infrastructure to manage, organize, process all the data that feeds into the model. So I got exposure working with data warehouses, learning SQL, like everything was in Python, even setting up infrastructure like Kubernetes to run models and deploy different algorithms and infrastructure. And then I also got experience on the data science side, doing more exploratory data analysis, developing predictive prognostic models. And then my fifth bullet here, I have this built SarahTracker.com. So this is something that I got involved with as a co-curricular. SarahTracker.com is a dashboard that presents and analyzes findings from antibody data from COVID-19. And I started this about 2 years ago now, and I was one of the 3 engineers that built the dashboard on the back end side from the ground up. And I took all my knowledge, you know, from Swift on the data engineering side into this project, and I loved working on this project and still do today a lot on the data engineering and data science side. And then finally, my last co-op was at Clearco with Irina, like I mentioned, and that was, you know, all data science. It was really cool to do like data with financial data involved. We did a lot of forecasting. We did a lot of exploring revenue data and patterns that exist and trends in revenue, how to optimize our ML algorithms to be more accurate and more customizable. And yeah, overall, it's been a really good mix between both of them. I think if I look back, I probably do like the engineering work a bit more. I think I found the data science work sometimes to be a bit slow, requires definitely a lot of patience because your analyses don't always lead to findings. But it was really cool to be able to try out, you know, kind of both fields throughout my journey.
Cool. And yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Cesar. I'm also a 4A biomedical engineering student here at Waterloo. And I'm actually used to be a software engineer at Google and at Uber AI, and I also used to work. I did a co-op at Postmates as a machine learning engineer. Yeah, so we can go to the next slide. So starting off, very similar to Simone, actually, I pretty much also hated coding first year. I actually barely passed first year CS. In the course that we took, I actually got 55% on the final. And I was also in a very similar spot where I was kind of like, oh, I really don't want to do programming. I really didn't see a lot of point to it, and I didn't really see what we could get out of programming in our real life. So I was like, this is kind of useless to me. I never want to do anything related to it. However, when the first job search came along, you kind of see that pretty much all the jobs that first years get tend to be software related. So for my first job, I was actually working for the MS Society of Canada, and there I was working doing some QA stuff. However, I had the chance to essentially take on a side project, and one of those side projects that I got to do, we essentially wanted to automatically classify scientific documents. And so this was kind of a very rough introduction into data science and machine learning as a whole. And I really actually liked it. I figured I didn't really understand like how we were so far advanced technologically that I just was not aware of things that we could do. And so when we were able to like build this very simple model that was able to tell you what a document was about, it was really cool to me, and it really essentially opened my eyes to want to do more into this field. So kind of fast forward to my second co-op, I decided to do more machine learning, specifically as they're related to the biomedical engineering space. And so for my second co-op, I was essentially working at a company that was trying to classify different sleep stages. So for those of you that don't know, as you sleep, you tend to go through a couple of different sleep stages. And the goal of the company was to read through this like ECG data and see if we could automatically detect different sleep patterns. And so this was a really, really cool experience because it's a pretty new field. There's a lot of new research being done on this. And because it was such a small team, we're just a team of 4 different engineers. I really, like, the work that I did really had an impact. And so I really got to learn a lot, get into the nitty gritty of actually what you need to do to be able to develop the models, kind of like the research that you have to do and figure out what's out there, and figure out how to put what people have done in the research into a specific application to make it do what you want to do. So after that, I decided that for my next co-op, I really wanted to work at, I guess, like an actual tech company. Because before then, I had actually had very little experience with anything to do with GitHub and version control and things like that. So with that, I was actually able to land a job as a machine learning engineer at Postmates. And so Postmates is essentially a food delivery app, very similar to Uber Eats. You go on and you essentially order food. And so there I was working with the personalization and discovery team. And my job was to onboard a whole bunch of new models into their home feed. So the home feed is where you have like all the recommendations. And what I was working on was building the new deep learning models for their recommendation system. So this was a really, really cool experience. Again, the team was fairly small. I think we were just a team of 5 or 6 developers. And again, the work I got to do had a big impact. And for the first time when I worked here, the work that I got to do actually got deployed into production. So the models I was building, the deep learning models, the recommendation models that I was working on, were actually deployed on the application. So it was really cool to essentially see what I was working on being used by thousands of users, millions of users actually across the United States. And so after that, I did an internship with Uber AI. So very similar to my job at Postmates, I was also working with the recommendations team with Uber Eats. And here we were exploring different model architectures that we could use for recommendations. Again, it was a very, very cool experience. I think here I also got a lot of experience into kind of the machine learning infrastructure. So part of my job as a software engineer was not only to build the models, train the models, and validate them, but also build out like the necessary infrastructure you need to be able to serve these models to millions of users around the world, right? How do we make predictions? How do we deal with millions of people using our application at the same time? And so this was something that I didn't really get to do before, but I really had the chance to do there. Yeah, and then after that, from my last co-op, I was able to get an internship at Google. So Google, again, I was a software engineer. Here, it was slightly different. It was more focused on machine learning infrastructure specifically. So here I was building a specific infrastructure for serving, so deploying models into production at large scale and for many different teams. So I was working directly with model developers and figuring out what we could build to make their lives easier, how we could train models faster, and how we could get models from development into production as fast as possible, and be sure that once we deployed the models into production, they were actually going to work and they weren't just going to crash. So yeah, that's kind of my journey so far.
All right, so just to go over a few simple do's and don'ts. You know, a job search can always be a little intimidating. What do I put on my resume? And you're in a tight time frame, especially through Waterloo Works. Everything is like, I need to get this done this week, this done next week. So I think it's really important that you keep an open mind. You know, a lot of times you may have a mindset of, I want a job at this company, or I want this specific role, or I want this. And it's really competitive. So it's hard to actually get what you set out to get in the first place. So don't like demean a certain job. You might see a job and say, oh, you know, I'm not, I don't want to do that. I feel like I'm overqualified. Or even on the don't section, don't worry about job qualifications where you may not feel qualified. For example, you know, if you're first getting into the field, like Irina did, or basically all of us did, and to some extent, you look at a job qualification, you might say, I don't know how to do half of this stuff. We're all co-ops most of the time that you're applying for. No one knows how to do all this stuff. If they were, they probably aren't co-ops. So it's fine. And then treat your interviews not as my ability to explore out technical information, but also treat it as if you're having a conversation with that person. You're interviewing them about the work culture you'll be doing, you'll be in, what work you'll be doing, trying to get, you know, a sense of the job rather than them just get a sense of your technical abilities. And that also gives them a sense of your communication skills. You know, you're trying to have an actual conversation, not just regurgitate information like it's a test. And yeah, check out job descriptions. Job descriptions, going back to the qualifications point as well, they may be listing a ton of qualifications they don't actually need. For example, you know, I'm in the data engineering field. There's a bunch of different tools people use for building, for example, ETL pipelines. And a job description may put like 5 of them, but the company uses 1. The reason that they put all 5 is because the skills are transferable. You don't have to know all 5. You can know one thing on there and you can make it work. And the job description might say you might be doing this, this, and this, but it's really just to give you a sense. Take everything on there with a kind of a grain of salt. You're not going to be doing every single thing on there. And start your shortlist early. There's like, you know, thousands of jobs there, and main round you get 50, and you still have a limited amount. I think after it's like 300. So you gotta wean through there, get on there early, start shortlisting early. You can, you know, start seeing what is supposed to be on your resume by taking a look at all those jobs. You know, if you get in there really late, last second, you're like, oh, it's just 50. I can find 50 jobs like that. There's a huge list. That's true, but you might look through those 50 and say, oh, there's all these common denominators asking about, for example, they want to know about TensorFlow. I know that, but I didn't put it on my resume. You know, random example, but it's good to do that early so that you can always keep tailoring your resume until the day that you apply. And on your to keep on the resume point, I think it's nice to have an interest section. Resume, everyone's resumes can look really similar. It gets samey for a lot of people when they're reading resumes. I've been on the opposite side of, I'm a co-op that needs to look at resumes of the next co-ops and pick someone out. It gets really samey seeing all the same similar formats. You get a bunch of stuff. What really helps is getting an interest section, because the only time you ever get to interact with the people and let them know who you are as a person, not just a list of specifications on a resume, is in an interview. They don't really get to understand who you are as a person, but having an interest section gives them just a little glimpse into that. It's a little different than just, a list of skills, your qualifications, your projects. That's standard, and your experiences. But if you have a little something different, it gives at least a bit of a personal touch so that you can, get that personal engagement started before the interview. And for interviews, don't skip them, don't be late. It's your first, it's pretty obvious information. That's your first impression to the people. You want to be on time, you want to be, dressed for the occasion. Don't be in PJs necessarily. A lot of them are online. You roll out of bed, do your interview. Maybe don't do that, get out of your PJs, take a shower. And don't lie on your resume. That a lot of times you get caught in that loop of, I want to fluff stuff up, which is great, do that, but don't fluff to the point of you're adding things you don't know about. Or you see, for example, back to that earlier point of everyone has TensorFlow. I don't know that, but I know some other libraries. I guess I can just put TensorFlow. That puts you in a really tough position of, if that company actually uses the specific tool you put on and they start asking you questions about it, you're kind of like, oh, I don't actually know that much about it. It puts you in a really tough situation, which will just make you look worse in the resume, in the interview, because you have it on your resume. So it's kind of just to, keep things to the point of everything on there you can at least speak to. Don't just put things because it shows up in every job description. If you don't know it, it shows up in every job description. Maybe you should learn it, but don't just put it there if you don't know it at all, because it ends up looking worse in the long run. Yeah.
Yeah, so some additional, I guess, resume and job searching tips. So I think first of all is to also try to look and apply for jobs externally. So definitely Waterloo Works is a really good resource to look for jobs and apply for jobs, but there's also a lot of jobs that you'll find that are actually just not posted in Waterloo Works, right? Specific companies might just do different timelines, or they might just not want to do the whole Waterloo Works process, right? So definitely, if you see a company that you like, or if you see a specific role or a specific job that you really want to do, don't be afraid to apply externally, and feel free to reach out to different recruiters and ask them about the job application process. Next is to definitely ask other people about their experiences. So I think that's definitely something that I did a lot, asking either upper years or mentors or people that I knew that worked in different companies, kind of what their day-to-day was like, what they liked about the job, things they didn't like about the job, how the application process was, and things like that, right? Kind of being able to, usually like the job description is very brief and doesn't give you a lot of information as to what goes on when you're actually at the job. So being able to talk to someone who has been there and who's worked there gives you a much better picture of what you're doing, right? Because sometimes they might paint the job description to have fancy words, and then at the end of the day, you're not doing any of that, right? So you want to make sure to talk to people to actually figure out what you'll be doing at different jobs. Similarly, you want to try to get recommendations. So if you know a person working at a company, or if you have a friend, many companies have some sort of referral recommendation program where essentially they can refer you, and you have if people refer you, you have a higher chance of getting the interview, right? Because definitely the hardest step is getting from that, sending the resume to getting that interview. Because once you get the interview, you actually have a chance to talk about yourself and sell yourself better and more than just what the resume says, right? And kind of similar to that, I'd say a very good tip is also don't be afraid to network with people that you work with. So this is both like at different companies as well as different classmates that you might have, right? Being able to network and talking to people and just knowing people in the industry is a very easy and honestly a very easy way to get to know about different jobs and even hear about different opportunities, right? Just because you know these people and it might be easier for you to actually get them interview. So another tip is to tailor your resume. So kind of what we were talking about previously, it's really good if you have a lot of experience, you want to make sure that you're always highlighting the experience that's most important depending on the job. So if you look at specific job descriptions, they might list specific libraries that they use in specific languages. And if you do have those experiences, then it's really good to write about them in your resume because it kind of makes it stand out, right? You kind of become closer to that ideal candidate that they want to hire. And finally, another tip is to write a cover letter. I think actually for most of my jobs that I've actually gotten, I've ended up writing a cover letter. So definitely, I don't know, I actually don't even know if most of my cover letters are read, but just writing the cover letter and having more information about the job and even just describing yourself and why you're passionate about the thing, I think is a really good thing to do and just a really good tip in general.
Cool. So I can talk about some interview prep tips. Don't be overwhelmed by this. I've added more than less just so that you know all the things that, I think that you should know when you're preparing for interviews. So the first 4 are more technical and the last 3 are more tactical. So, know your basic data structures and algorithms. Like data science and data engineering interviews, I don't think are like typical software interviews. Like they're not typically asking you, to like reverse a linked list or to find the max in a binary tree. But I have had situations where it's helpful to know, really basic structures. So I would say, make sure you're familiar with just the really basic structures and algorithms in case they ask you to describe it even rather than implementing it. Next with SQL, I think lots or if not all of my data science interviews have asked some SQL related questions. So, they'll give me some data and they'll say, okay, based on this data, might have to join some tables and find, what the max value is or count something. So again, be familiar with different SQL operators, know how to use them, know how to solve basic problems. And this is relevant to the job, right? Like imagine you're going to get in, you're going to have to extract data from their database. They're going to have hundreds of tables. And so you're actually going to have to know how to do this stuff. So it's not just relevant for the interview, it's relevant for the job. This one I've been asked less frequently, but I would say it's good to know basic stats and probability concepts. Sometimes I think Cesar more than I have, but I think he's been asked some, more ML jobs, like definitely some probability questions. If you've taken some stats courses, great. But if not, it'd be probably good just to review that and know basic like Bayes theorem, stuff like that in order to answer basic probability questions. The next thing I would say is most of data science work honestly is done in Python. So I would say number 1, make sure your Python skills are top notch and are really strong. And for basically working with large amounts of data in Python, you're always going to be using pandas. So I get really familiar working with data frames, series, different manipulations, and just knowing that will help you to be more confident in an interview. If they give you a data frame and say, work with this, it'll just be really helpful if you have some background in that. The next things I would say, practice your story, right? Like it's not for companies I've worked at that I actually have found the interview's been a good fit. They don't just care about my technical skills, like they want to know me, right? So I've been asked questions about my story, my experiences. So practice that. Like, why should they hire you over someone else who can do the same technical things? Practice selling yourself and explaining what value you specifically can add. Also research the company, understand what it does. This is a very trivial one, but it's often overlooked. If the interviewer asks, what do we do? You should know what they do. It's a pretty easy one. So make sure you take some time to actually, research what they do. If you know people who have worked there, it's a great idea to talk about it. And then finally, prepare questions. Like good questions not only boost their perception and impression of you because it shows that you're doing critical thinking. It shows that you're interested in the company. It doesn't even have to be technical questions. It can be about the business model. Tell me about why you guys have made this decision, or who are your target customers. It can be really whatever question you want, but prepare questions. So like, Mooj was saying at the beginning, like you're interviewing them too, right? Understand if they were to say, okay, we'll give you a job. Do you actually want to work there? What do the interviewers' day-to-day lives look like on the job? So make sure you have a good set of questions so you can get a really good feel, especially in Waterloo Works, right? You typically get one interview and then you got to decide on the day of. It's a bit easier if you go outside because you can have follow-up calls with the recruiter to understand the culture. But if you're interviewing on Waterloo Works, you typically get one shot. So make sure you have a good set of questions prepared ahead of time. Yeah, that's about it.
All right. Well, I hope this presentation was really helpful for you guys. Thanks for listening. And now we'll move on to any questions.
For anyone with questions, you guys can either put in the chat or I guess you can just unmute if you guys have any questions. But I guess I'll start us off with our first question, or my first question, I guess. So I know you guys mentioned talking about applying to jobs externally. And you guys also mentioned contacting recruiters to find these opportunities. But my question was, do you guys have any experiences using like other platforms or like other job boards? And if so, do you guys recommend any particular places to find these jobs externally other than like Waterloo Works and through recruiters?
I mean, I think if there's somewhere you specifically want to go, the company website will always have the most wide variety of jobs. You know, some companies don't post them like every single job on every single job board. And, you know, reaching out to recruiters can be hard, but I think I like LinkedIn. It makes it really easy. You know, you can look up a company, you can see who works there, you can see who the recruiters are, and you can usually just message them. You know, it sounds like it would be hard, but it's surprisingly not that bad. You know, if you can phrase out something decent, a cold message to someone actually works a lot of the time. You know, an email works as well if you can find their work email if they have it posted somewhere. But you'd be surprised. You know, a lot of people feel a little embarrassed or, you know, a little scared to do something like that, but it works really well. Especially because a lot of people feel like that. So if you choose to actually do it, you'll be a much smaller minority. Your name will automatically jump up a few places in the pile because, you know, now they've actually talked to you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if you do decide to like cold email someone or cold call like a recruiter or something, make sure that it's not like generic. Make sure that you're actually like taking in the time to like write something specific, like why you're interested in that specific company or that specific position. I've had friends that have like, you know, posted like a LinkedIn post adding like some of the recruiters or some of the CEOs at small startups, and they've gotten their attention and they actually created a co-op position for them. So it can actually happen, but just make sure you do it properly and don't like, you know, like half-ass it or anything.
Awesome. I had another question, but this was networking related. So I know with, at least for me, all of my past co-ops have been virtual. And so like when I try to network with people on my team or in the company, I've noticed that it would be like a virtual chat for like 30 minutes. And then after that, we never really talk. So is there a way you maintain that organic relationship with them?
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing. I think that's definitely one of the biggest challenges of like having to do remote. I think most of us were probably lucky in that our first couple co-ops were actually not remote and just the last ones were. But yeah, it's definitely a difficult thing. I think one thing at least that we tend to do is the team used to have a lot of like happy hours and things like that. So if your team has any sort of happy hours, like make sure you go to the happy hours. I know for actually one of my co-ops, I would ask different people for lunch. So like feel free to literally like go up to people in your team and just like send them a Slack message and be like, hey, do you want to like grab lunch? And it can be like a super informal thing where you just like talk to them and get to know them. And that way you actually get to know different people in the team, right? I think another thing is to also talk to a lot of other co-ops. If there are other co-ops in your company, try to talk to them and try to set up co-op events, right? Like you don't need to have like an intern supervisor or anything like that. Like you guys can literally make up events as you go, right? Like a game night, board games night, even things like movie nights, right? So definitely, it's a hard thing, but it's kind of, if you take the ownership and kind of reach out to people and talk to people, I think you'd be surprised that most people actually want to be reached out to. Like I know the people that I talk to, like I never got a no, or people are like, oh, sorry, like I'm busy, I don't have time to talk to you, right? Like people don't tend to be that way, right? Like people want to talk to you and things like that. So definitely, I'd say reach out to different people is my number one tip for that.
Thank you so much.
Great. I actually have one other question as well. So going back to the technical side of things, I guess like we can say that like all of you guys started as beginners, which is awesome and super encouraging for a lot of the people, especially me in particular too. So then I guess what types of problems do you think are useful in prepping for like data science interviews, especially as a beginner? And do you guys have any suggestions on any particular courses you took either through Waterloo or through like other online platforms like Udemy that you found particularly useful for data science jobs and interviews?
I mean, I think there's a lot of really good resources out there. But what I've always found, other than Udemy courses, there's a company called Springer. They make textbooks. Every year they release freely like a bunch of textbooks. And for like interview prep type stuff, they're really, really useful. So I think I have on my computer like 10 of them that I just downloaded. And it's like data structures, it's SQL, it's ML, it's a variety of things. And so you don't end up having to pay for a course. You don't get someone to guide you or handhold you through it. So it is a little harder that way, but you get to learn a lot more like fundamentals that way. Um, and and one thing I've noticed is those Udemy courses, they'll make you do projects, and those projects usually end up on a lot of people's resumes. Um, you know, they'll make you do just basic side projects and they'll toss them on there. The standard draw a number and you have a neural network that deciphers it. But what's really useful is actually take what you learned on that and just tweak it a little bit and you'll have a slightly different project. So if you learn a recommender system in a Udemy course, which I did, they teach you the standard like book recommender system. Just take that and that same knowledge you have and then connect it to some sort of API. I did Spotify, so you can get it to make you a playlist or whatever. And that makes you instantly stand out because a lot of people do take those courses. That's the thing with them. They're very accessible and they are most of the time that anything I've taken are very good. But because they're good, a lot of people take them. So, don't just leave yourself at that course. Try to expand on it a bit. So set yourself slightly apart.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks.
I can add to that as well. I would say don't be too worried about like prepping data science specific things. I think it's quite a niche field for people to know as a co-op, like going into your third co-op. I think it's kind of a lot to expect if a co-op knows a lot about data science going in. You need to show that you can problem solve regardless of the question that they give you and that you have experience that's going to enable you to succeed. Like companies are going to take on co-ops knowing that they're going to have to teach them on the job, and they just want to see that you know how to figure things out, you can problem solve, you're resourceful. So if you can just demonstrate that through the interview, I wouldn't be worried about prepping data science specific problems or knowing how to answer certain data science specific questions. Show that you can problem solve, explain in your past experiences how I went in, didn't have this experience, on the job I managed to get up to speed, fill in that knowledge gap. That's what they want to see, even if you don't have the specific skills that are needed for data science yet.
Sorry, I just remembered something from what Simone just said. The thing with data, especially data science, is she's right, it's not that much about the technical, it's really about the data. And the data at each company or each thing you're doing is very independent. So when I added that finding a niche, there's always domain knowledge. So even if you're a beginner to coding and data in general, you must have had a background in something else. There's something else you're passionate about. So for example, where I work, Ecobee, most of their data scientists come from a physics background because they need that to know to be able to write models that can deal with understanding how the humidity affects the temperature in the home and stuff like that. So if you're a beginner, you're coming from somewhere else, use that to set yourself apart in some way. And don't worry so much about the technical skills, because if you've got that other knowledge, it's really useful to certain companies and to certain roles.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. I had a more general question, but this was related to referrals. I don't know if any of you have ever like leveraged referrals to like get an interview, but if you have, like, what was that process like, especially if you're reaching out to someone who isn't a close friend to get that referral?
I've been on the other end of it. I haven't personally reached out to anyone I don't know that well. But if you, you know, a lot of people do reach out, and I know, I know Irina has received some of these as well. I'm assuming Simona did too while they were at Clearbank. But a lot of people will just reach out to you and say, "Hey, I'm looking to work at whatever company you are working at the time." And I feel like most people are very receptive to that, right? Like if they have the ability to help, they will be willing to help. But provide something to actually create some sort of a human connection. Don't just go, "Hi, I would like a recommendation." Try to reach out to them and be friendly first, and then lead in with the recommendation. They'll know that's why you're there, but it rubs some people the wrong way if you just come in and straight up ask. So just like a normal conversation, just reach out to someone, just say, "I have some questions about the job or the company," and then say, "Yeah, I enjoyed the conversation. Could I get a recommendation?" Rather than, a lot of messages do come in of, "Can I get a recommendation?" And that's where the initial reaction of, "I don't even know who you are," comes in. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah, so while I was at Clearco, I did have like a few people. I think most of them were from Waterloo, younger years, that just DM'd me on LinkedIn, which is fine. Like they reached out, they're like, "Hey, like I'm really interested in working at Clearco as a data scientist. Can you give me a recommendation?" And I'm like, "Hi, like, who are you?" I don't know who you are. So I can't really, like, it'll look bad on me specifically. Like, I'm not saying that if that person say, like, I don't know if they're experienced or not. I don't know what their level of skill is. I don't know what they are as a person. If they're a bad candidate, which most of the time they aren't, but in case they are, it would reflect badly on me, and I don't want that. So just make sure that you're being really careful when you're asking someone that you don't know is particularly for a recommendation. Some people will like gladly give it and wouldn't really care, but I say for the most part, like try to establish a connection first and then see like if they're willing to do that. But even like if say like you did that and you were like, "Oh, hey, like can I get a recommendation?" I would probably not give you a recommendation personally, but I would definitely help you through the process, like explain like how, like what my application looked like, what I did to get this, what kind of questions were asked, like kind of that thing. And I would definitely guide you through the process, but not necessarily like give you that boost of like recommendation. But in terms of like if you were just asking a friend or like someone you actually knew for a referral, a lot of companies will have like a specific portal where like you have like a unique like referral link for someone at the company, and then you kind of go like bypass that, and it's flagged on your application so that when the recruiter's looking through it, they'll be like, "Oh, this person was referred by this person," kind of thing. Most companies have that system set up. Yeah.
No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I had another question actually. So I guess looking at all of your backgrounds, it looks like you guys all started in like different spots, I guess. Like, so I guess my question was, because obviously data science kind of covers like it's a big word that covers like a lot of different concepts, like whether it be like machine learning or AI or stats or probability. So as a beginner, what do you think is like the most important concept that you should be learning to get started?
Just
So to
get
be
good at
honest, I'm not
Python.
sure if there's oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just gonna say really quick, just get good at Python. I don't think there's a single concept you can nail down on, but an industry standard is most people use Python. Um, that's really the only standard thing, right? You said it's really vast. You can't nail down into one area. Go ahead, Cesar.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I'd say Python is definitely like number one thing that people use. Definitely like common libraries, like I think Simona mentioned, like Pandas is a common thing. I think in terms of other technical skills, I think having a very strong mathematical background definitely helps, right? Because everything to do with data science, you're going to be dealing with a lot of numbers and a lot of data, and having that strong mathematics background, even if it's not directly related to stat, even if it's not directly related to data science, sorry, is very useful to have. Like knowing how to take a derivative, like what a second derivative is, like even things like the Jacobian and things like that, right? Like they're, at least for me, have been like super useful to actually know what they are, because even though I haven't applied them in the job, like I can read through research papers and kind of follow along what they're doing based on like that base knowledge, right? So I think definitely my number one thing is to have a strong calculus and linear algebra knowledge, because those are definitely like the strongest fields that tend to be in data science, right? In software engineering and data science in general, you tend to use those a lot. So I would say those are like the top two technical. They're not really technical skills, but just like things to know, right? And have a strong background in.
Yeah, I would also add that SQL is a really powerful tool as well. Like you can be, like Python's definitely really important, but a lot of the times in order to like load the data into Python, you do need to write like some sort of query or some sort of like SQL just to like kind of load the data in from like another source. So yeah, definitely know your SQL as well.
Great, thanks. That really answers the question.
I had one last question. But I think like on the slide deck, you mentioned that to treat the interviews basically like you're interviewing the company. And are there like specific questions or certain questions you've used a lot to really understand the culture? Because I know sometimes it's a little difficult given the fact that interviews are only like 30 minutes long.
Yeah, there's a question that I always like asking, and it's something along the lines of like, for like any like previous co-op candidates or any of like the previous co-ops at this company, what was the most difficult thing like in the job that they struggled with the most, and how did they like resolve that, or something like that, if that makes sense. That's kind of like the question, just to kind of get a gauge of like what the hiring manager is like as well, how they answer that question, if they're like helpful or all that stuff.
Yeah, I can add. I would say one I like asking is if they've worked at the company for a long time, like why have you stayed at the company? It's not so much why did you join the company, because lots of people join it because it seems exciting or I was interested in the work, but it's more like why have you stayed? If they've stayed for a long time, they probably can speak really highly about the culture, and there's probably something really specific about the job that they've liked. So it's kind of a good question to ask them, and they probably reflected on that about why it's good culture fit, why it's good lifestyle fit. They can explain also how they continue to learn even though they've been staying at the place for quite a bit of time. So yeah, that's what I like to ask as well.
One I always use is what do you like most about your job or your company? And adding on to that, what do you dislike the most, or what is the most annoying part? Because that gives you a lot of insight onto what the nagging points are and what the really fun things to do are. It's really helped me out in a couple situations where I remember it really helped out was it was a job with the military. It was like with the Department of National Defense. And it sounded like a really cool job. Job description looked real nice. And as soon as I asked that question to the interviewer, he kind of just went, he basically just went off on a tirade of how he doesn't like the job because of all the red tape and stuff. And I was like, that was very useful. It kind of stopped me in my tracks. But that gives you a really good insight of what the working environment is like. And it might give you an insight to that person who might be your manager or a mentor of some sort. It gives you an insight of that person, what their likes and dislikes are, but also of what the working environment is like, just through that. Not only seeing the good, but also the bad.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much. I just like made a note of all of those questions, so thank you.
All right. I think that sums up all the questions, unless we have any last questions. Going once, going twice. All right, I think we're good here. So thank you guys again for an amazing presentation and answering all of our questions. We really appreciate you guys sharing all of your journeys. from beginners in pretty different programs to now professionals in the field of data science. And I, as well as the rest of the audience, I'm sure found it extremely insightful and encouraging. As for the rest of the audience, our next event coming up will be the networking session, I believe, with Loblaws and Databricks at 4:20 p.m. EST. So be sure not to miss that. And again, this session was recorded and we will be posted on our YouTube channel later if you guys want to refer to it again. So yeah, thank you guys for attending, and see you guys in the rest of the hackathon. Thank you to our speakers.
Thank you.
so
Bye.
much.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.